This is Optometrists Building Empires, and I'm your host, Ankit Patel. Each week, we'll explore the journey of multi-practice ownership and leadership in optometry. Join us for insights and strategies from the top minds in our field. This show is sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team helps your office increase revenues, reduce costs, and reduce staffing headaches. Let's build your empire together. Today's guest is someone I'm excited to present. He's probably one of the most business savvy ODs I've ever met. He's got an entrepreneurial spirit dedicated to providing the highest quality eye care possible. He's got over 15 years of experience and numerous awards and recognitions for academic and clinical achievements. He believes that the best service in eye care cannot be provided without kindness for everyone who walks through the door. He's the owner and optometrist of Midstate Eye in Eye, Wisconsin. Please welcome Dr. Bradley Grant. Bradley, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolutely a pleasure to be here and to be included in this podcast. It's exciting.
Yeah, I love, every time I talk to you, I love speaking with you because you have such a unique way of thinking and looking at business. And, let's kick it off with our usual question that we like to kick off all of our podcasts with is, what was the most important thing that helped you grow your empire?
Well, I'll start it off with kind of a tongue-in-cheek answer, and then I'll layer in some details along the way. But if what I would say the number one theme is we try to take a look, and if everybody is zigging, we try to zag, and so that's the overarching theme. And to give a couple examples of that, I mean, first would be just the type of practice that we've sought after and acquired, and we have really kind of ran towards practices that, for the most part, would be considered undesirable. Whether that's 4 of the 5 that we've purchased have been historically declining revenues. The only one that didn't have historically declining revenues had been flat for the better part of a decade. So we've been running towards what we consider to be opportunities based on what we consider to be revenue lost based on patient volume. But a lot of people walk away and we start running almost a dead sprint towards those. The second would be just the location. I think that we've really invested in much more medium-sized or smaller-sized communities, and that's where we feel like we've been able to generate the best long-term wealth and profitability. And so I know nowadays it's more difficult to find doctors providing care in those rural settings, but gosh, from a business perspective, from a profitability standpoint, from a wealth building standpoint, the ability to own your own real estate, I mean, all of that to us has just made sense in those smaller communities. So where everybody is looking to focus elsewhere, we're trying to follow where there are patients that are underserved, and it makes it easy to grow. And then lastly, I'll kind of put a teaser in for some of the conversation that we'll talk about later is I don't believe in picking sides based on false truths about the industry or just general fear about what is coming or here. And so I'll lay that out as a teaser, but we can dive into that a little bit longer and a little bit down the road.
Definitely want to do that.
Yeah.
As you're talking, it's interesting. I know in your introduction, I talked about how kindness is important to you. It's almost like that permeates in everything you're doing, because it does take a kind person to say, like, you know what, I'm going to go after people who are underserved. Right.
Right.
Quick anecdotal share. I used to work at the Cleveland Clinic as a process engineer. And I remember they made decisions to shut down hospitals in areas where there were no other hospitals. And so they're the only game in town. And so contrast that with, you're actually going the other direction. Like you said, you're zigging when there's zag, or vice versa.
Yeah. We found that individuals in those communities, they understand where they live, right? They understand that they're not next to major metropolitan areas, and they are so incredibly appreciative and supportive of professionals who invest in those communities and say, I'm going to plant my flag here. And it's just very easy to build patient loyalty. And I think you could extrapolate that, just being innately kind and compassionate. That's our mission statement. I think, to be kind always, to be compassionate always, and we try to make that our North Star for all of our employees. And that's the mission that we have, and we want every patient to feel that. Again, I think that that could be extrapolated to all different kinds of business, but especially in healthcare when it's a difficult healthcare system now, right? It's about
Yeah.
volume and numbers, and to do that in relation or in alongside of kindness, it's not the common experience that most patients have. So you stand out when that's what you do.
Can you give me one example how you're kind towards your patients that come through the door that maybe other optometrists or other listeners may not know or may not think about?
So I think it's a lot of it has to do with understanding how to navigate certain plans. I think that in our industry, we really focus on trying to level up those plans that are the most profitable and kick out those that are least profitable. And we have had our fair share of filtering through that. But it starts from even just the conversation on the phone, right? We've acquired practices where, if somebody calls with a certain plan, it's we don't see you. Okay, well, that's probably not the best message to be portraying to a patient, right? Everything starts with, "How can I help you?" Even if the answer is no, we don't take that plan. It's molded into, "Here's how we can provide you access to
Yep.
care." It may be out of network. It may be different from what you've been told in the past, or sometimes it's just, we don't see this plan on those days, and just getting rid of all of those ways in which there are innate kind of judgments made about patients before they walk through the door. It goes a long way before they even walk into our offices to be, kind and accommodating on the phone.
So, I mean, everyone has bad days, but I'm guessing if I walk into
Yeah,
your office, your staff's not going to be like, "Oh, there's Mr. Smith again. He's a real PIA," right? They're
right.
not having that kind of
Yeah,
conversation. They're not prejudging folks. That's really awesome to
right.
hear. Everyone has bad days. I know. It's just it's really easy to go to through that cycle for folks.
Yeah.
So it's really cool that you've built a culture like that.
Some of that's on the business side of it, and making sure that we are allowing our staff to have that flexibility, right? If we're asking our front desk to answer every phone call that comes in, um, then they're going to be overwhelmed, right? They're on the phone and they're also having to smile at a patient walking in. They're on the phone and they're also having to verify insurance, right? So I know we'll get into this, but some of the ways in which we try to free up our staff to just be kind, just be pleasant, just be the, ridiculously smiling face that they see when they walk through the door, is taking some of the burden away from them so that they're not just busy, 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 because everybody's going to get in a bad mood when they're just busy, busy, busy.
Yeah, and I'll share like a little anecdote. So, the whole I'll get a little geeky here for a second. So, like phone calls, patients walking in the door, walk-in patients, not scheduled patients. They're like what they call a stochastic process. And
Hmm.
so you can estimate how many you're going to get in and how much time in between arrivals, but you don't know how many when they're actually going to come in, right? And
Right.
so it pulls people away. And I've noticed that for me and everyone I've ever was worked with, multitasking is tough. So whenever you're like, oh my goodness, my attention is diverted, it really takes away from patient experience. So it's really interesting that you find that that helps with kindness as well. With
Right,
yeah,
right. And it's personality typing for the right people that are interacting with patients as well, right? Some individuals are fantastic at organization, and you want them on the back end doing those rote data entry things, those insurance type things, but they definitely don't multitask well and do it with a smiling face in front of a patient. So we want to make sure we have our best and most kind personalities that are actually interacting with the patients, and some of that
yeah.
just evolves over time.
So let me ask, what's been one thing, if you had to say one thing that caught you by surprise as you were growing that you didn't expect, what would that one thing be?
So the one thing that really surprised me, once once you let it get out that you're in the business of buying practices, everybody's a seller. So, so,
Yeah.
I think I was surprised. I knew that in this landscape of optometry, there's a large percentage or a large volume of doctors that are looking to transition their practice,
Mhm.
looking to retire, looking to slow down, looking for the next generation to come in. But I was overwhelmed by how many opportunities were presented to us once we just let maybe a lab lab rep, contact lens rep, drug rep know. we were kind of inundated with, "Hey, would you like to buy me? Would you like to buy me?" And not every opportunity, you can't say yes to every opportunity because you just can't. Um, but I was surprised by how many sellers there were, unknown sellers there were once we were kind of announcing that we were buying. I think I was also surprised once I started digging into some of the numbers of practices. Again, one of the things that I always like to do when we're evaluating if it's a good fit for us is I asked to be able to get into the EHR so that I can look at the coding and the billing habits. And I'm really been surprised by the way in which I think we undercode our services and we kind of devalue our services, especially to medical payers. We would evaluate practices that have, you know, it was just called $100,000 in medical testing equipment so that they could provide a fantastic standard of care, and they weren't being compensated for it. Or they weren't either charging the patient, they weren't billing, and it just floored me in the ways in which there's so much profitability out there, but there's a gap there between, coding and billing education and actually being, reimbursed for things. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah.
Well, it's a win for everyone, right? It's good for
Right.
the business, obviously, because the reimbursements are better, but it's better
Mhm.
for the patient because now when you're a and you're because you're doing what doctors love to do is
Yeah.
treat the patient and not just refract, right? And so
Right.
I think it's a
Yeah.
win-win for the patient, for the business, for the doctor. It's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's maybe a misconception that our choice is either to accept poor reimbursements from vision plans or have to go all cash pay. And there's just such a wide opportunity in the middle, which is making it, our the bedrock of our practices, medical billing entities. That the more times that I can shout that from the rooftops, I think the better it's going to be for all of us in the industry because that's where I think we are, and certainly where the future is taking us.
Yeah, and just we'll touch a little bit more in the future in a second. But it's interesting because the more I read the research out there with AI, a fundus photo is starting to be able to predict more and more things. Like I was reading that it can predict like heart disease, certain amount or either an OCT or a fundus. One of those two can predict heart disease if you have the right data set. And so I was like,
Right.
okay, well, the eyes are it makes sense, right? Eyes are sensitive, they're going to see changes first. And so if there is indications, you're probably going to see the eye first. And yeah, I think it's just going to get more and more medical as it grows.
Right. The algorithms for the AI based on different conditions and findings are going to get better and better and better every year. And the studies show that the best care provided is AI plus a doctor. Right,
Yeah.
and so we need to be excited about partnering with those companies to provide the best level of care that we can. It shows that AI alone, is not as good. Doctor alone is not as good, but the 2 compared together or coupled together provide a better, more accurate level of care, and that's where we're going.
Yeah, absolutely. So looking forward to that. So what made you want to grow your empire? Right, like everyone has like their origin story. What's
Right.
yours? Like what kind of drove you to that? Like why
Yeah.
why grow it?
So I didn't necessarily if you'd asked me 10 years ago, I didn't necessarily say I wanna have X amount of practices, at that point in time. I think just as, um, I cold started right out of optometry school. It's kind of an outlier in that way, in the sense that it was my first job out of optometry school was a cold start, and, we took it on the chin. We didn't go under or anything, but it was a wake-up call for, how difficult it is to generate new patients from nothing and generate revenue from nothing. So I think I always had a passion for it to start, but just as we got further and further into practice ownership, I just really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the business side of it. I enjoyed just the calculation side of it, the metrics side of it. And from an investment standpoint, I like to say I don't understand how an abundance or lack of rain in uh, India affects the global economy, right? So I can dump a bunch of money into the market that I know nothing about,
Yeah.
or I can choose to invest in the small market that I know a lot about. And so for me, that's where we've made the investment, and it's been really exciting to just say this is our business entity, this is our investment. We can control the outcomes fairly well. And so we've made that our theme, and it's been exciting.
That is pretty interesting.
Mhm.
And I mentioned how well, you're one like probably the most entrepreneurial OD that I've talked to, one of the most entrepreneurial, and that's I hear other entrepreneurs, other industries say the same thing. I will always get a better return on my business than I will investing in the market or anything else. And so it's
Right.
interesting to see that
Yeah.
consistent pattern. When I know you haven't talked to these people, right? And so
Mhm.
it's interesting to see that.
Yeah. I mean, I might be a podcast junkie, so I've probably heard what they've said. Yeah. Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the challenges you're facing. I know that almost everyone across the country is facing rising staff costs and stagnant reimbursements,
Mhm.
especially when you have multiple locations. You feel that at scale. So, what
Right.
are things that you're doing to kind of help with manage that? So, any tips and advice or things that you might have for our listeners?
So we've invested in a few different avenues. Or one, we've invested pretty heavily in just staff training, because and training in the sense of cross training. We've tried to just look at the reality that staff are more transient now than they have been, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and so you kind of have to look at each office and say, all right, what do we absolutely need to function? What do we need from a streamlined standpoint? And then if we have these key individuals, what if we, could teach um, this certain employee to maybe be able to dispense glasses? Okay, we're not nearly as hamstringed if we're down an optician, if so and so can do this. So we've really invested in training and cross training with each of our staff. And then we've also done quite a bit of outsourcing just in terms of our back end business infrastructure, and really been able to consolidate multiple offices for business processes, and that has helped tremendously because turnover, especially at the front desk, that's the first voice a lot of individuals or a lot of patients hear when they call. A lot of times that's the front line on some insurance verification. A lot of times that's the person at checkout who's responsible for making that next appointment. So you're building that revenue year after year after year. And so when that position turns over, it's very daunting to be able to train that individual in a short period of time. So when we can systemize and use companies like my business care team to take a lot of the load off of us, then again we can hire for personality. We can hire for personality, take our time training on the things that we need them to do on the ground level, and it also helps us from a profitability standpoint. So it's been a phenomenal shift that we've made in the last I would say 6 to 12 months, and very much beneficial for us.
It's interesting because when we started my business care team, thank you for that, by the way. But the when we started it, we noticed that we got people away from being multitask answering the phones, but we noticed the same thing. We were able to pay our staff better. We were able to hold
Mhm.
them better training and hold them accountable, and our
Yeah.
revenues also spiked 33%, as well as our cost being managed better. So I thought it was kind of interesting to see. I didn't expect that second piece when we did that. So
Mhm. Yeah.
curious, you talked about cross training. How do you consolidate that with still being kind and not being pulled away and being multitasking? Like, how do you manage that with your team? Because I imagine a lot of people are thinking right now, like, how do I prevent that from happening and staying keeping people focused?
Right. And so just to kind of give clarity on terms of how our business is structured, we have multiple locations in Illinois and then multiple locations in Wisconsin. With having we try to structure our schedule to where we're really efficient when we have clinic days. So we might see a higher volume of patients the days when the doctor's there, but almost none of our offices are a doctor there 5 days a week. And so there are rotating non-doctor days, and when we have that opportunity, we can move staff around. So we might send a scribe to one of our offices because it's a very busy clinic day, and then the other individual who might be a technician on a clinic day now is helping in the optical, or maybe now is covering a front desk. And
Okay.
so we tried to be able to provide cross training that allows us to move staff within each state, and we can kind of flex up for busyness and flex down for non-doctor days. And so it's easier than saying, okay, what's the busiest we ever are? Maybe we need 9 staff members in each location. Well, on non-doctor days, that's a tremendous waste of money to be paying 9 staff members if there's nobody in there seeing patients. So we've tried to, have a lot of moving pieces in that way.
Interesting. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that you're not necessarily going from you're not going to necessarily be a front desk person for one patient, then tech for another, an optician for
Correct.
another. You're going to stay as a
Yeah.
front desk person one day. You're going to stay as an
Yes.
optician one day. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. That
Yes.
you have the capability of flexing between roles based off of where you're needed the most that day.
Correct.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting. That's a good model. I know that a lot of larger companies implement that for sure. So,
Yeah. And those individuals, per hour obviously make more,
yep.
but it's not the same linear increase in overhead cost as another full-time employee. And so the margin in terms of that staff infrastructure just helps.
Yeah, I also find too that when you have like really high performing folks that are good, I'd rather pay them overtime if they're
Oh
willing to
yeah.
do that, and it ends up for the business, it's a win because you get better people working the hours,
Hmm.
and usually a little bit cheaper sometimes. And then for the staff, if they're okay to it, they like it too because they get a little bit extra compensation. So,
Hmm.
um, awesome. So let's talk a little bit about what you're facing right now. What keeps you up at night? What's one of the some of the challenges that you're facing? Maybe one thing that is like, oh man, this is really something I'm having a tough time with right now.
So I would say, what keeps me up at night, maybe not just keep me up at night, but what I think about at night is I like to visualize what can sink the ship,
Hmm.
right? And ask Blockbuster Video, ask Circuit City, ask Kmart, right? Like
Yeah.
every ship is sinkable, right? And so I think it's about visualizing what that means, whether it's cash flow, staff, um, market influences, online, retail sales taken away from us. That's what kind of keeps me up. I try to envision what it is that could sink our ship, and then formulate a defense against it. And I think that's part of being successful. To give a concrete example of the one thing, we're recording this just on the eve of the FTC eyeglass rule going into effect. And so, those are things that we have to comply with. We don't have a choice, and obviously the ruling is somewhat angled towards sales leaving our office, or at least the perception of that. And so, making sure that we are branding to the patient in the proper way, so that we're notifying them about how the care that we're providing is excellent care and maybe superior care to what they could receive elsewhere, and finding new ways to motivate them to purchase from us. And so I think it's all about branding. It's all about the message while under the umbrella of compliance. And so that's what specifically has garnered my attention these last few weeks.
Yeah, that's been a fun one. Trying to put the infrastructure in place to make sure it works out and
Yeah,
make sure we're compliant
yeah,
too. So yeah,
yeah. And staff love saying, "Oh, I just need you to do these three things
yeah,
more for every single patient," just because somebody said we have to. I mean, those always go over well.
yeah, yeah. Well, it's part of being
Right.
regulated business, I guess. So
Yeah.
things like
Yeah.
that happen, but hopefully it'll be good in the long run. So for the
Mhm.
patients. Um, So let's talk a little bit about what you're excited about in the future. Like, what's either the industry, your business, combination, or you personally? Just what are you excited about?
So I'm really excited about, I know this may sound strange. I'm really excited about AI's integration into our industry. I really feel like that in combination with teleoptometry or telehealth care, I really feel like AI is going to be far more about teleoptometry, telecare than it ever was, or teleoptometry is going to be a lot more about AI than it ever was about COVID or what it was in 2020 and moving forward. I think that it's really going to allow us to reach into those even more rural communities, right? I think it's going to allow us to expand without necessarily having to have a doctor everywhere, right? That's our biggest limiting factor. And for most, I would agree that you talk with is they might have the infrastructure in place and the system in place and the cash flow in place to say, yeah, we could take on another acquisition. We've got a good model for that. But if I don't have a doctor, there's no use in even considering it, right? And I never make an acquisition or even consider an acquisition unless we have the doctor in place first, right? We don't buy on a prayer hoping that we'll recruit somebody, right? That's just too risky for us. But with AI integration into the space, I think that we'll probably see a day when we can expand into more rural areas for medical care, diabetic eye care, screening for things that are medically based that that doesn't require a doctor there on site, and I think that's exciting.
So it's interesting. Back in 2018, I actually invested in a company. It's a startup here out of Georgia Tech
Yeah.
that they take one of the handheld fundus equivalent, like a Welch Allen.
Mhm,
They
mhm.
would take a scan and they would upload it and send it to their interface, and they train machine learning to pick up on diabetic evaluations. And then they would send that to a doctor, either OD or MD, to analyze it. And
Right,
so the doctor who took the scan gets a portion of it. A person who did the analysis gets a portion of the compensation, and then the company gets a portion of the compensation.
right.
And so, that's been, you're right. That's already kind of starting to happen. And I see with phones getting the way they are, with the technology coming out, I think there's going to be, I think you're spot on with that. I mean, heck, even in the suburbs where we live in Atlanta, the Vision Works has a remote doctor now.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so it's not even like rural areas are starting to use it.
yeah.
I don't know how patients feel about that in the suburbs because there's options, but in rural areas, there's not.
Yeah, and I understand the argument against it. I don't agree that it's the same level of care that you can provide with a live doctor, but the reality of the numbers of this country are there's 300 and almost 46 million individuals and not nearly enough eye care providers to be seeing them at the rate that they need to or are willing to. And so something has to give to be able to provide care for those who have no access to it. And I think we can be on the front, leading edge of that in terms of providing those services as an industry, instead of just saying, well, if you can't come in the door, I can't see you, right? There's just not enough of us to provide care for 346 million people. Just not.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun. So we'll see how
Yes.
things go. And
I'm going to follow your lead.
yeah,
Okay.
so that's what I was going to say. I was going to cheat off of your test. I mean, we can't cheat off of each other.
Let's just sit next to each other. That way it'll be
Fair
fun.
enough.
Yeah.
There we go. There you go. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's
Mhm.
talk about what makes Bradley Bradley. So if you had to pick, anywhere from like three-ish to five type visceral, like seminal moments in your life where you felt like it
Mhm.
formed you as a person, as an entrepreneur, wanting to go, whatever those might be. It could have been
Yeah.
lemonade stand when you were six or a college course. Um, can you share with us some of those moments that shaped you to be who you are today, that you feel shaped you?
And so I think just going back to growing up, I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. Actually, a multi-generation line of auctioneers
Oh,
is my
okay.
family business. But business owners, self-employed. My dad was auctioneer, self-employed, and very much middle class, but also very much um, wrote his own rule book, right? And I was one of five kids. There was four boys, and so we were involved in a lot of activities. And I remember distinctly that my parents were present at everything, and we were present at the dinner table together all the time. So we had that really strong core of togetherness of what I felt like owning my own business could provide. Also, was one of four boys, so that made me kind of innately competitive. And I like to joke that so all of my brothers were phenomenal athletes, and I'm not, an awful athlete, but I was more of a mathlete, and so I joke that they were all conference, all district, all state, and I was all most cut from the team. So that, that kind of, I guess, it fueled a little bit of a fire in me of anything you
Yeah.
can do, I can do better, for lack of a better way to say it. And so I think I've just always tried to, um, you know, um, tried to one up, my brothers, and I think that maybe carried over into into optometry business a little bit. Yeah.
What sports did you play? I'm curious. Did you play high school,
Uh,
college, or just high school?
Just high school, basketball and football.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Basketball was my main sport, but I was a wide receiver in football for a wishbone offense that never threw the ball. So you got,
You're a decoy, basically, or a blocker. One of the two.
yeah,
Yeah.
I was running off the
Yeah.
cornerback. Yeah, basically.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah. I'm curious. What
Mm.
position did you play in basketball?
I was like a 2 guard, 3 guard.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
So
two
we,
guard.
we, we can call you like a Kobe Bryant, right? Or a Steph Curry. No.
Yeah, yeah. If
Yeah.
if yeah,
Quick
if their
athlete,
shooting
yes.
percentage was much less than what theirs was, and yeah,
Yeah.
much less prowess. That's exactly right.
That's what I say. If I had, Michael Jordan's height, skill, talent, and build, I'd be him too. Right?
Yeah, I mean, just a completely different person, and I would have been better.
Yeah, there you go. Oh, cool. Well, I appreciate that. So what's uh let's time travel a little bit. And
Mhm,
so let's pretend we time travel to when you graduated OD school, 4 days after OD school.
mhm.
What would you, if you're going back talking to yourself, what would you tell yourself, knowing what you know now, to your 4 days fresh out of graduation, Bradley?
Yeah, I don't know that I would do anything different. I mentioned that we cold started right out of school, myself and another partner, and I think that even though that was a very challenging time and it was less revenue than we had predicted, in our projections. I don't think that I would be sitting here talking to you as someone who owns 8 locations if I hadn't really, cut my teeth for a couple years and saying, I need to know everything about everything in terms of how, I'm going on the iMed portal and filing claims. I'm teaching the staff every single aspect of the office. If I didn't have to dive in at that point in time, I don't know that I would necessarily have got it. I think I probably would have told myself that you need to expect the ebb and flow, right? Don't assume that it's just always going to be, linear increases in cash flow and linear increase in easiness of it, right? There's an ebb and flow. I mean, this. 2 months out of the year, there's 3 paychecks instead of 2, and that's a strain on cash flow, and it makes the profit and loss look awful. And it's just this normal up and down. And so I think I would maybe have just counseled myself to say, the highs and the lows are coming. Keep looking far enough off in the distance that you keep taking care of people, you keep doing the right things, you keep treating your staff well. All of that other stuff takes care of itself when you've got that focus in mind. And so, yeah, I think my path was what I would pick again, but maybe just a little bit of wisdom on the stressors that were coming.
It's funny.
Yeah,
I smile because I had that almost exact same conversation with my wife, who
yeah,
I was describing, like, look, this is not it hasn't been a linear path for our businesses, but now it's, you're
hmm
starting to see the nonlinear changes. So it's been pretty fun. So,
hmm
so tell me, tell the audience or tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. What do you like to do for fun? Any interests and hobbies that you like to do, or any interests that you have?
So I'm married. Been married 21 years. I was married in optometry school, actually.
Okay.
So, and then we have 3 children. My oldest is a senior, and I have a 7th grader and also a 7-year-old second grader. And so honestly, I don't have many hobbies, but my hobby is to spend time with my family. I mean, the businesses keep me very busy from a work standpoint, so I'm pretty protective of making sure that I have not just time with the family as a whole, but I also really like to try to make sure we're carving out time individually with each one of my children to make sure that we have those times and those moments where it's special. My 13-year-old, my oldest daughter, is very much built like me. She's pretty type A. She's
Mm.
we're up earlier than everybody else. So I mean, she's 13, right? So her and I do not see eye to eye every second. But we have this tradition on most Saturday mornings where before everybody else gets up, we take a drive into where the University of Illinois is, about 20 minutes away. We go to a kind of hole in the wall donut shop next to the school. We get donuts for everybody. She gets the DJ. We jam out to Taylor Swift or whatever the flavor of the month is for 13-year-olds. But just try to build those moments that are going to hopefully be special for my children long after they leave. So I don't have individual hobbies really, other than just trying to dive into the family moments that I get.
That's great. Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that with 2 small kids at home too.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah,
majority of my life is built around, okay, how
yeah,
can I maximize the time with them while
yeah.
so. Well, excellent. So, Dr. Grant, where can listeners find you?
Yeah. So two companies actually, soon to be a third, but my 2 companies are Midstate Eye, and so just uh, website Midstate Eye. Also, we have I Wisconsin, EYE Wisconsin. I'm also on LinkedIn, and so any of those mediums, they can look me up and find contact information. And obviously, if any anyone's in that avenue of saying, gosh, I really feel like I've got this individual practice thing figured out and I'd like to take that next step. I think it's hardest to go from 1 to 2,
Mhm.
honestly, because you have to build a remote infrastructure.
Yeah.
I would be happy to answer any questions or just even share our experience for what we ran into, good and bad, along the way. And I know that you echo that same sentiment in terms of, how you scale. But yeah, certainly feel free to reach out with any questions. Happy to answer.
No, I appreciate that. And we'll put all those in the show notes as well for listeners. And with that, once again, thank you, Dr. Bradley Grant, for being on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And thank you, listeners. If you learned something today, laugh, please share the podcast or YouTube video if you're watching on YouTube with someone you know. Thanks again, Dr. Grant. And this has been another exciting episode of Optometrists Building Empires. And we'll see you next time. That's a wrap on another episode of Optometrists Building Empires. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, visit buildingempires.live. This show is proudly sponsored by My Business Care Team. My Business Care Team was born out of staffing challenges my wife and I faced together, managing multiple optometry locations. We refined our approach at Classic Vision Care and now offer our expertise to others. If you're experiencing challenges with staffing and you'd like to set up a discovery call, we'd be happy to help you and connect you with the right resources. We'll see you next time.